Someone should answer for it, but we'll see. I think we know who the culprits are.
It's all funny. And then I think all our tax dollars probably went for Gavin's hair gel. I don't know, but it's like, it's sad. It's like the place is just on fire.
In the early hours of January 7, 2025, Los Angeles erupted in flames as the inferno consumed over 40,000 acres and claimed 11 lives. One voice emerged from Hollywood with an explosive allegation. Mel Gibson, standing in the ashes of his $12 million Malibu mansion, didn't just blame Mother Nature. He saw something darker at play. It just seemed a little convenient that there was no water, the actor told Fox News, suggesting the fires were commissioned to clear valuable California real estate. Was this just another conspiracy theory? Or did Gibson's accusations point to deeper problems within LA's burning paradise? The truth, as it turns out, is more complex than anyone imagined. The fire that sparked a Hollywood conspiracy. As flames engulfed the Pacific Palisades that fateful January morning, Nick Leonti became the first to witness what would become one of California's most devastating wildfires. From his home on Palisades Drive, he watched as the first sparks of 6 separate fires began their deadly dance across the Los Angeles landscape. Within hours, these flames would merge into an unstoppable force, ultimately scorching 40,000 acres, an area equivalent to 28,000 football fields. But while the fires raged, Hollywood icon Mel Gibson, safely in Texas recording a podcast, received the news that his $12 million Malibu mansion had succumbed to the inferno. His response? A raised eyebrow and a startling theory that would set social media ablaze. Speaking on Fox News, the 69-year-old actor suggested these fires weren't just a natural disaster, they were commissioned to clear prime California real estate. The damage was staggering. Insurance adjusters estimated losses between $50 and $150 billion, with over 12,000 structures reduced to ash. Among the ruins lay thousands of homes and businesses, each telling its own story of loss and devastation. For the 11 souls who lost their lives, no price tag could capture the true cost. Yet as investigators combed through the wreckage, peculiar details emerged. While California's fires typically spark from lightning strikes, electrical failures, or accidents, none of these usual suspects appeared responsible. Instead, law enforcement had arrested several suspected arsonists, though their connection to all 6 fire sites remained unclear. This detail caught Gibson's attention, leading him to question whether these individuals were commissioned or acting on their own volition. The timing seemed almost too perfect. The fires didn't just start, they erupted simultaneously across different locations in the Pacific Palisades, each one strategically placed to maximize destruction. The Lydia and Sunset fires, though smaller, joined forces with their larger siblings, the Palisades, Eaton, Kenneth, and Hearst fires, creating a complex web of destruction that seemed to defy natural fire behavior. For Gibson, the most damning evidence lay not in what was present, but in what was missing: water. As firefighters battled the inferno, they encountered a crisis that would later become the center of heated debate. How could a city known for its wildfires, a city with some of the highest tax revenue in America, suddenly find itself without water pressure in its hydrants? For the skeptical actor, this wasn't just a coincidence, it was a smoking gun. But before we dive into theories about commissioned disasters and convenient failures, we need to understand the perfect storm of conditions that made these fires so devastating. What forces of nature came together to create 100-mile-per-hour winds in Los Angeles? And why were these conditions so unprecedented? The answer lies in a deadly dance between 2 weather systems that would turn Los Angeles into a tinderbox. When nature turned against LA, weather patterns rarely align with perfect destructive precision, but January 7th brought together a meteorological nightmare that would transform Los Angeles into a wind tunnel of unprecedented force. High above southern Idaho, an ominous high-pressure system began its clockwise rotation, like a massive aerial centrifuge spinning southward. In the northern hemisphere, these systems typically rotate clockwise, but what made this one lethal was its deadly dance partner. Far to the south, lurking off the Gulf of California, a low-pressure system spun counterclockwise, creating what meteorologists would later describe as a perfect pressure vice. As these 2 giants swirled across the western United States, they found an unwitting accomplice in California's geography. the Sierra Nevada mountain range. These ancient peaks didn't just watch the chaos unfold, they actively channeled it, focusing the wind's fury directly toward Los Angeles. By 4:30 in the morning, the high-pressure system had begun its descent, while the low-pressure system crept northward. The Sierra Nevadas acted like a massive funnel, pinching and accelerating these winds to extraordinary speeds. Think of squeezing a garden hose. The narrower the opening, the faster and more powerful the stream. Now imagine that stream is air, and the hose is hundreds of miles wide. What made this weather pattern particularly treacherous wasn't just its intensity, it was its timing. Los Angeles had experienced one of its driest periods on record, with the final 3 months of 2024 recording a mere 0.03 of an inch of rainfall. That's 1/100th of the typical 3.5 inches the city usually receives during its winter months. The landscape had transformed into a tinderbox, waiting for a spark. The resulting wind speeds defied belief. While weather stations initially recorded gusts of 50 to 60 miles per hour, individual regions around Los Angeles reported speeds reaching up to 100 miles per hour. For perspective, these are hurricane-force winds in a city that rarely sees anything close to tropical storm conditions. Residents who lived in Southern California for decades reported never witnessing such fierce winds in their lifetime. Adding to the catastrophe, meteorologists delivered a grim forecast. These extraordinary conditions wouldn't be a one-day event. The weather pattern showed signs of persisting through the following Wednesday, promising sustained high winds that would continue to feed any fires that sparked. It was like nature had decided to hold a blowtorch to Los Angeles, and someone had jammed the trigger. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. As firefighters prepared to battle these unprecedented conditions, they faced another crisis that would prove just as devastating as the weather itself, one that would transform their emergency response from challenging to nearly impossible. How do you fight a massive fire when your most basic and crucial resource, water, suddenly stops flowing through your hydrants? When heroes lost their wings. As Los Angeles burned under hurricane-force winds, hope arrived in the form of the CL-415, a legendary firefighting aircraft nicknamed the Super Scooper. This remarkable machine represented the pinnacle of aerial firefighting technology, capable of skimming along the ocean's surface to collect up to 1,500 gallons of water without ever needing to land. Like a massive mechanical bird, it could swoop down, fill its tanks, and return to the fight in one continuous motion. In a heartening display of international solidarity, Canada dispatched 2 of these aerial warriors to join the battle, while Mexico sent dozens of experienced firefighting personnel to support ground operations. It was a powerful reminder that when disaster strikes, borders become meaningless in the face of human compassion and cooperation. But just as this international coalition began to coordinate their assault on the flames, disaster struck. In the early hours of operations, a civilian drone collided with one of the Super Scoopers, striking its wing and causing significant damage. The impact forced not just one plane to ground, but temporarily halted all aerial firefighting operations while authorities assessed the situation. In those crucial early hours, when every drop of water could have made a difference, these vital aircraft sat idle on the tarmac. The grounding came at the worst possible moment. While Super Scoopers normally excel at their mission, the extreme winds already made their operation precarious. Helicopters, another crucial tool in firefighting operations, faced even greater challenges. With wind speeds exceeding 50 miles per hour, these aircraft risked dangerous blade stall conditions, a potentially lethal situation where the retreating rotor blade loses lift, potentially causing a catastrophic loss of control. For the pilots who managed to stay airborne, their missions resembled something out of an action movie. Veteran aviators, some with decades of experience, described the conditions as among the most challenging they'd ever encountered. Each approach required split-second decisions, threading the needle between powerful wind gusts while maintaining enough control to accurately deliver their payload of water or fire retardant. The irony wasn't lost on the firefighting teams. The same winds that made aerial operations so dangerous were also feeding the fires with an endless supply of oxygen, creating a vicious cycle that seemed impossible to break. Every minute these aircraft spent grounded meant more homes consumed, more lives endangered, and more territory lost to the advancing flames. But as these aerial warriors fought their battle in the skies above Los Angeles, An even more insidious crisis was unfolding on the ground. After 15 hours of relentless firefighting, the city's water system was about to reveal a fatal flaw, one that would leave firefighters watching helplessly as their hydrants ran dry. How could a city that sits beside an ocean find itself without water in its moment of greatest need? 15 hours until darkness. In the heart of the Pacific Palisades, 3 massive water tanks perched high above the city held the key to survival, each containing 1 million gallons of water, gravity-fed to create the pressure needed to fight fires throughout the region. But as the battle against the inferno entered its 15th hour, firefighters faced an unthinkable reality. The tanks were running dry. Just 1 mile from where the fires first ignited sat the Santa Ynez Reservoir, a 17 million gallon lifeline that could have refilled those crucial tanks more than 30 times over. But this potential savior held a dark secret. It had been sitting empty since February 2024, nearly a year before the fires began. The reason? A tear in its floating cover that allowed debris and bird droppings to contaminate the water supply. The most maddening part of this crisis wasn't the damage itself, it was the repair costs. The Department of Water and Power had initially estimated $889,000 for the fix. When they finally approved the work in November, the actual cost came in at just $130,000. 7 months of bureaucratic delays had left this crucial reservoir empty during the city's moment of greatest need. But the story gets more complex. The Santa Ynez Reservoir sat at 750 feet above sea level, while the initial fire outbreak occurred at 1,200 feet. The water tanks themselves perched even higher at 1,500 feet. This elevation challenge meant that even with a full reservoir, the city needed sophisticated pumping systems to move water where it was needed most. Under normal conditions, the system handled water demand of 1,100 gallons per minute. But as firefighters battled the inferno, they were pulling more than 3,300 gallons per minute, triple the usual flow. The math was brutal. At that rate, even full tanks couldn't sustain the fight without proper infrastructure to refill them. By 3 a.m. on Wednesday, the cruel reality became clear. Water pressure in the upper Palisades had dropped to nothing, leaving firefighters watching helplessly as homes continued to burn. The pumping rate to refill the tanks simply couldn't match the desperate needs of those fighting the flames. It was like trying to fill a bathtub with a drinking straw while simultaneously draining it with a fire hose. The city's emergency preparedness showed fatal flaws in its design. No backup generators to power additional pumps during power outages. No redundant water sources positioned at strategic elevations. No emergency protocols to rapidly deploy additional water supplies to high elevation areas. The system wasn't just failing, it had never been properly designed to handle this scale of disaster in the first place. Governor Gavin Newsom called for an investigation into the loss of water pressure and the reservoir's unavailability. But as officials began to dig deeper into the city's infrastructure spending and maintenance records, they uncovered a pattern of budget decisions that would shock even the most hardened critics of government inefficiency. How could California, with its massive tax revenue and world-leading economy, find itself unable to fund basic infrastructure maintenance and emergency preparedness? A tale of two budgets. When comparing California's financial might to the rest of the world, the numbers seem almost surreal. The state's annual tax revenue of $220 billion dwarfs most nations' entire economies. To put this in perspective, only 56 countries on Earth generate more in total GDP than California collects in taxes alone. It's a financial powerhouse that should have more than enough resources to maintain basic infrastructure and emergency services. Yet somehow, LA Mayor Karen Bass approved a $17 million budget cut to the city's fire department. Fire Chief Kristen Crowley didn't mince words about the impact, publicly stating that her team lacked both the equipment and personnel needed for effective pre-deployment, a crucial strategy where firefighting resources are positioned near high-risk areas before disaster strikes. The contrast becomes even more stark when examining California's dam maintenance crisis. 42 aging dams across the state desperately needed repairs, with a total price tag of just $50 million. These compromised structures were forced to operate at reduced capacity, leading to a catastrophic loss of water storage potential. In one winter alone, California had to release 107 billion gallons of water, enough to fill 1,000 reservoirs the size of Santa Ynez. simply because damaged dams couldn't safely hold it. The state's spending priorities tell an equally troubling story. Health and Human Services consume the largest portion of the budget, followed by K through 12 education. Yet despite spending 150% more on education compared to previous years, California served fewer students than ever. Enrollment had peaked at 6.3 million students in 2004, dropping to 5.8 million in recent years, all while administrative costs soared. Meanwhile, $14 billion poured into homeless services, yet the state's homeless population grew by 3% year over year, reaching 188,000 people, roughly 1/4 of America's entire homeless population. The money seemed to vanish into a bureaucratic black hole, with little improvement to show for the massive investment. Even property taxes, which generated an additional $76 billion annually, averaging $1,950 per California resident, somehow couldn't bridge the gap. This separate revenue stream, meant to fund local services and infrastructure, disappeared into local coffers without addressing critical maintenance needs. Most baffling was how California managed to run budget deficits despite this astronomical income. The state's total revenue approached $300 billion annually when combining all tax sources, an amount that should have provided ample funding for both routine maintenance and emergency preparedness. Instead, basic infrastructure repairs were deferred, emergency services were cut, and crucial water storage systems were left to deteriorate. For Californians watching their homes burn while firefighters stood helplessly beside dry hydrants, these financial revelations raised a chilling question. If the state couldn't protect its residents despite having one of the largest tax bases in the world, what would happen when insurance companies inevitably decided that California had become too risky to cover? The Great California Exodus. In the affluent Pacific Palisades, where the average home value exceeds $4 million, a silent crisis had been building long before the fires began. State Farm had already dropped 1,600 policies in July, forcing homeowners to seek coverage through FAIR, California's Fair Access to Insurance Requirements Plan, a last resort option for those who couldn't obtain traditional insurance. Out of 9,000 homes in the Palisades, 1,400 had already resorted to this backup coverage. It wasn't just a few unlucky homeowners. It represented 1 in every 7 properties in one of California's most prestigious neighborhoods. This mass exodus of insurers had begun well before the January fires, with more than 100,000 Californians losing their coverage since 2019. For longtime residents, the pattern was particularly cruel. Homeowners who had faithfully paid premiums for decades without filing a single claim suddenly found themselves abandoned by their insurance providers with no refund for their years of loyalty. The insurance company's actuaries had done the math and decided that no premium could justify the risk of covering homes in these fire-prone areas. California's insurance commissioner, Ricardo Lara, attempted to stem the bleeding by issuing a mandatory 1-year moratorium on non-renewals and cancellations for residents affected by the recent fires. His office even urged insurance companies to reconsider any cancellations issued in the 90 days before the disaster. But these measures offered only temporary relief. The implications stretched far beyond individual homeowners. California's massive tax base relied heavily on its wealthiest residents, who paid the lion's share of both property and state income taxes. If insurance became impossible to obtain, these high-earning taxpayers might have no choice but to relocate, potentially triggering a fiscal crisis that could dwarf the cost of the fires themselves. This insurance crisis wasn't unique to California. Florida faced similar challenges with its hurricane risks, creating a two-coast exodus of insurance providers from America's most climate-vulnerable states. The message from the insurance industry was clear. The financial models that had sustained the housing market for generations no longer worked in an era of escalating natural disasters. For those lucky enough to maintain coverage, the future promised skyrocketing premiums that would make California's already expensive housing market even more unaffordable. The ripple effects would touch every aspect of the state's economy, from real estate values to tax revenues, from construction jobs to local businesses. As smoke still billowed from the ruins of multi-million-dollar mansions in the Palisades, attention turned to the human cost of this disaster. Beyond the statistics and policy discussions lay personal stories of loss and devastation, particularly among Hollywood's elite, whose hilltop estates had offered perfect targets for the wind-driven flames. While Mel Gibson's burned mansion made headlines for his controversial claims, he wasn't alone in watching his dream home turn to ash, which other celebrities lost everything in what some were already calling the Great Los Angeles Fire of 2025. When stars fall to earth, the contrast couldn't have been more stark, from the glittering lights of the Golden Globes to the amber glow of destruction. Just days after Hollywood's elite walked the red carpet, their multi-million-dollar sanctuaries became statistics in California's growing list of fire casualties. The timing was cruelly ironic for Adam Brody and Leighton Meester, who had celebrated Brody's nomination earlier that week, only to watch their Pacific Palisades dream home burn to ash. Their 6,000 square foot residence, purchased in 2019 for $6.9 million, with its 5 bedrooms and 6 bathrooms spread across 3 floors, now stood as a hollow monument to nature's indifference to human achievement. For Billy Crystal, the loss cut even deeper. His emotional statement captured the heart-wrenching reality faced by many long-term residents. "Words cannot describe the enormity of the devastation we are witnessing and experiencing," he shared, his voice carrying the weight of 44 years of memories. "Janice and I have lived in our home since 1979. We raised our children and grandchildren here. Every inch of our house was filled with love, beautiful memories that can't be taken away." The list of affected celebrities read like a Hollywood Walk of Fame: Academy Award winner Anthony Hopkins, beloved comedy icon Eugene Levy, television personality Sandra Lee, talk show veteran Ricky Lake, and acclaimed actors John Goodman and Miles Teller. Each property represented not just a monetary loss, but a sanctuary where art was created, lines were memorized, and families were raised. Reality television stars weren't spared either, with Heidi and Spencer Pratt joining soap star Colby Smulders in the growing list of displaced celebrities. Even veteran actor James Woods found himself among those forced to evacuate, adding his voice to the chorus of displaced Hollywood residents. The destruction painted a sad picture of fire's indiscriminate nature. These weren't just celebrity homes. They were repositories of film history, personal archives, and irreplaceable memorabilia. Awards, scripts, costumes, and photographs collected over decades of entertainment history vanished in hours. Despite their resources and connections, these entertainment icons found themselves as powerless as any other resident in the face of nature's fury. Their losses served as a stark reminder that even California's most privileged residents weren't immune to the state's growing climate crisis. From Mel Gibson's explosive conspiracy claims to the stark reality of failed infrastructure, the Los Angeles fires of 2025 exposed more than just our vulnerability to nature. They revealed deep cracks in a system that was meant to protect us. What do you think? Could better engineering and leadership have prevented this catastrophe? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this investigation enlightening, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more deep dives into stories that matter. We'll see you in the next video.